Good morning, everyone. It's just about 10 o'clock, so I see that we have 3 of our 5 ad hoc committee members today for our meeting. So we'll go ahead and begin the meeting. This is the Governance Manual Ad Hoc Committee for the Cradle-to-Career system. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming down. And again, really appreciate your efforts in trying to get us to an updated governance manual. There was some work done that was sort of in a smaller group last month, and so our agenda for today is to take a look at those adjustments that were that came out of that March 25th meeting. And for those of you that are not in the room today and that are following along in our virtual landscape, follow along from the link that's in the C2C website. The provisions are part of the meeting materials. So you can follow along on your own screen as well. We'll talk through each of the items to determine whether or not we want to continue to revise them or go ahead and set them. And from there, we'll take the recommendations of this ad hoc committee to the full board as the next meeting in May. That would be May 11th for final review and approval. So the time has come now to take public comment. Do we have any public comment?
Not yet. And can you speak just a little louder so they can hear you?
All right. Sorry, I've not been practicing my outside voice. Or my voice. It's a big room in here.
No, I don't see any public comment just yet.
All right, let's give it another minute or two. So in case people are still logging in or getting settled for the morning. Like everybody's. And it's okay. All right, Rachel and Celine, do we have any public comment?
No, I don't see any on my end.
All right, well then we'll go ahead and continue on. All right, so before us we have our list of edited topics, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kathy to facilitate a discussion of these revisions.
Great, thanks everyone. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be projecting the actual edited document up on the screen so that we can be looking at each of the edits in turn. But before we start, I just want to clarify sort of the nature of the edits that were recommended, both from the discussion we had in our last public meeting, as well as the 2 liaisons that did some additional work on it. So most of these adjustments are more clarifying the process of the board. So for example, how often is this manual going to be edited? A number of things about clarifying the roles between what the advisory boards are doing and the ad hoc committees are doing and how those relate to the managing entity, which is the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data. We've got some more substantive things as well that we're going to be discussing, like creating a very clear process for how we appoint alternates. One of the things also that is throughout this document that is probably not worth a lot of discussion, but is important to know because it makes it look like there's more edits than there may really be of substance, is making sure that we are consistently describing the managing entity. So that's a term that we use during the planning process, meaning whatever the agency or organization was going to be that was going to host the data system. The legislation made clear that that is the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data. So we did just go through and use that term throughout because we realized we were using a variety of terms. And this harkens back to those of you who were part of the planning process. We kept referring to the data system taking action, and inevitably some member of our work group would say data systems don't do anything on their own. So there's some clarifications there.
Kathy, just real quick, we just got a message for a public comment.
Oh,
so Rajil is going to unmute that person.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I just want to make a point that you're a stupid fucking bitch.
I'm sorry?
Did you take him out? Yes, thank you. That was
Oh.
somebody being appropriate. Anyone else?
No, we don't have anyone else.
Right, so then we'll go back to looking at the manual. Thank you. I switch my screen so that I can share. Okay, so again, I realize this is probably going to be very small on people's screens. We do have this document posted on the website for anybody who wants to go ahead and look on their own. So what I thought I would do is next to each of the comments which are highlighted in red, there is, or actually the edits, there's a comment box, which unfortunately is not very easy to read on this screen. So I'll just indicate what's there. And that's just a reminder of why this setup is made. So what I'd like to do is as we go through, if there's any concerns or discussions that our ad hoc committee members want to make, that you just, jump in, interrupt me, and I'm going to, for the sake of time, just pause for a moment before each one, and if you're fine, you can sort of nod and we'll keep it. So the very first edit is on the first page, and what we wanted to do is to make clear that we're going to be editing the manual at least once a year, which both sets a particular cadence that is going to be at the second meeting after the start of the fiscal year. And that had to do with aligning processes with sort of the plans that are being made for what's going to be happening going forward and reflection on the previous fiscal year's work. But it also makes clear that if there's something urgent that needs to be addressed, it can be handled at that, whatever point arises. Are there any concerns or questions about that one? Then we also made some clarities that the governance manual is not the entity or the mechanism by which all the rules are set. So we're referencing that there may be laws and regulations. This is a reminder that the governance manual is not binding, but just as sort of a rules of the road or the car manual, as we discussed in the first meeting. Scrolling down. And in the preface, one of the things that was recommended is that we just remind everybody what the purpose of the Cradle-to-Career system is, which is really looking at that pipeline between education and workforce. So there was just a little bit more clarification. Again, remembering that this is the first document that new board members are going to be looking. And then down here a little bit further, you see the first clarification of what we mean by managing entity, and that is the Office of Cradle-to-Career Data. And we make the clarification that we're going to use the term the office, not to be confused with the television series, to refer to the entity that's managing. Yes.
There's some comment missing, but somebody.
Sorry, where is the comment?
Just in reading the preface, the very first sentence highlights the education workforce pipeline, comma, should be there. I don't know if it's exactly, yeah.
The perfect time to make those changes. And I'll just do
It
that.
wasn't parsing for the other train, at least.
Yes. Thank you. When you add a clause, that always is good to add the comma.
Thank you, Meredith.
Right. So then going down to the next comment, we're actually all the way down in the governance system. And I apologize, this view is a little bit difficult to manage. So it's page 10. So one of the things that came up in the discussion is that the original charts that were shown made it look like there was going to be a direct linkage between the advisory boards and the governing board. But if you read the actual wording for the very carefully constructed governance framework that was recommended by the work group, the idea is that the advisory committees are feeding information into the office, And the office is then helping to contextualize those recommendations before it goes to the governing. So a really good example is, let's say that there was a recommendation that came out of one of the groups that we should have information on daily COVID testing results for all K-12 students, because that would be really helpful to understand and contextualize outcomes. Well, that would then go to the office, and the staff there would take a look at what does that mean legally, to put that kind of personal health information into the data system, to look at the feasibility. Did LEAs actually gather that kind of information? Is there a mechanism to report it? Things like that. So then when that idea gets considered by the governing board, there's some information about what it would mean to adopt the recommendation. And as we were clarifying that, we realized it would be preferable to have a clearer graphic. And that is what you see here, where you see that the ideas that are coming in from the various advisory boards, ad hoc committees, and task forces are running through the office to get to the governing board. So are there any questions or concerns about that revised visualization?
So then this ad hoc committee, for example, follows that same structure, right?
Yes.
It doesn't report directly to the governing board. It actually reports its findings to the office, which then gives it to the governing board.
Although we will ask one of you to present
Right.
on what you all recommended to the governing board. But for example, it didn't then leave you with a responsibility to go through and do all the line edits, although we really appreciate all of it. All of that work got done by the staff.
Right.
So that, and that goes back to, if you go back to the original division of responsibilities, the idea was that the board should be focused primarily on the vision and making sure that the office is appropriately implementing the vision as established by the governing board, but that the office does a lot of the legwork so that the governing board members can really stay focused on
would be helpful if this is intended to capture information flow and information of a certain type. If that was somehow part of the diagram, otherwise it sort of assumes that the arrows represent something else. I would question, are there bi-directional arrows here? What benefit it is to have the arrows going from right to left versus up to down, or in comparison to diagrams that we've seen?
That's a really good question. I think that there's many ways this could be visualized. Do you have a recommendation that you think would more accurately capture? Oh,
I think for me, it was just unusual to see the arrows going from right to left. And I was wondering if that was intentional.
nope. Opposed to, for example, our board chart where it's very clear that the office receives direction from the governing board, right, report to the governing board. Would it be preferable to put the governing board at the top and have the office below and then the committees below the office, and then to have some bi-directional arrows between the office and those various advisory boards and task forces?
I think for me, that kind of as a signal for hierarchy that we may or may not want. Perhaps we could just just flip the diagram, right? So we have data tools, community engagement, ad hoc on the left.
Yeah, that sort of subtlety was why I was saying like, oh, if I turn my head to the right, but then what sort of interpretation
Yeah.
signal does that send? And so looking at the landing page of the website, I kind of liked how there was this, center office and different areas of focus. And I wondered how any sort of governance diagram maps to that image, and if there's a way to convey the flow of information that sort of aligns, anticipates that question.
I'm putting up, you're referencing this graphic, which I've just put on the screen.
No, it was actually the one on the landing page of the website, which has like a purple in the center, and then
Yes, thank you. That one actually refers to the domains of work
yeah.
for the data system. This is a different graphic that was created in that process. So I'm going to go back to let's remember what the purpose of this is. which is to basically show the relationship related to, as you helpfully clarified, the information flow. So if this chart were relabeled to clarify that it's about information flow, and then we flipped it so that it has the advisory boards on the left and the governing board on the right, would that be helpful? Or is it still not going to meet what's needed?
I think that would be better. I would just note that we probably want to be able to answer the basic question of how does like governance structure and the information flow support the building support.
Let me make sure that that changes. So what I'm going to do is, rather than say the relationship, I'm going to say up here that the visual below clarifies the information flow between the governing board, the office, and various task forces. So what more do you think would be helpful to clarify beyond information flow?
Perhaps it's something for the FAQ or
So what normally gets clarified in governance, in addition to information, is decision-making authority. So would it be helpful to add something to this chart, like color coding with indicated decision-making authority? Because in truth, the advisory boards and the committees do not, that their decisions have to be ratified either by the office or by the board, depending on what the content is. So I could do that with some color.
that would be helpful, but I'd like to hear from the other members of the.
Well, my question after looking at this diagram compared to the original one is that I understand the placing of the Office of Cradle-to-Career and its contextualizing the work of the advisory boards for the board. But since we're talking about overall system governance here and not just how the work of the advisory boards meets its way to the board, should the arrow between the office and the governing board work beyond that, but it's going to eventually go in that direction?
That's true. So maybe trying to have one chart that clarifies all of this may be too much. Or is it with just changing colors for decision-making authority? Would that actually help?
Well, I'm thinking more along the lines of this has everything necessarily coming from Office of Cradle-to-Career. And I think what we're talking about here is the work of that office. We're talking about system governance from the line between governing board and office.
Purpose of this really is to help make sure that new board members know what the relationship is to those committees and how that pertains to the relationship with the management.
Yeah, I mean, that's different. I mean, when I read this, it says Cradle-to-Career system governance. And it describes the relationship between all of these writ large. So if it's something more targeted, two diagrams would be better, focusing on specifically the relationship.
One other possibility, which is that the visual is actually not helpful. So sometimes the purpose of visuals often is to take something complicated and make it very clean and easy to grasp, just glancing at it. And we're talking, when you start having to have a legend at the bottom that explains what all the colors and the fonts mean, it may be less useful. So do you think we should have a visual at all?
I think there's value in it. The bi-directional nature of the relationship, I think, should be emphasized. That's key. And then flipping the orientation, as we just discussed previously, I think that's really critical. And then maybe in the text that precedes that, we're much more targeted. So I think, like you suggested, Kathy, mentioning it's information flow as opposed to relationship, whether we decide that we're gonna have the decision-making element also portrayed in this visualization or in another, I think is slightly different conversation, but I think there is value in this visualization. Because it does show, like for me, the fact that the ad hoc committees function in a similar way as the advisory boards. It's not an offshoot of the governing board necessarily. I think that's valuable to understand. So maybe just a button really emphasizes the bi-directional flow of information. Does that capture what you were saying?
Yeah, exactly. And I agree. I think there is value in visual here because I think the advisory boards and task forces. The participation. So I think there's value. But I think the bi-directional, and I don't know, maybe is it too much to like annotate the lines? Like the line between the office and the boards is a certain kind of collaboration and work in the bi-directional line between the board and the office. Like mentioned progress. I don't know. Board on.
Well, this is really helpful input. What we can try to do is come up with a better visual and put that in the version that goes out, and then we can continue to discuss what that really ends up clarifying or not clarifying.
I like the suggestions. I like the direction of the discussion. I do also agree that it would be helpful if we could maybe by color coding or annotation, just that the governing board has the decision making amongst this group. Really, what we're looking at is the various different advisory boards, committees, task forces are pulling together information, right? And we're trying to also indicate the level of public members, as part of this overall effort. So I think being able to highlight these things, some of them are already here, and some of them I think will be helped by some of the adjustments that were suggested.
Moving the extra visuals, then moving down a little bit further. So we are now on page 12. I apologize. See that you guys can't see my way. One of the things that we did is we added just a little bit more to the governing board responsibility to clarify that they evaluate the performance of the executive director, because that's one of the critical groups that or ad hoc committees that has to be created. So that's one thing. Any thoughts on that before I move to the next one? And moving down to data and tools advisory board. So I sort of want to clarify the purpose of this bullet point. So when we were going through the process of how we would allow people to get access to unitary data for the purpose of something like a research or evaluation. So imagine that I, as a Wested researcher, want to conduct an evaluation of a particular intervention that was done maybe across the CSUs. And I actually have I know exactly which students got the treatment and which ones didn't. If I'm going to do that evaluation, I need to be able to get data that's specific to who got it and who didn't, which means that I have to get access to individual information, which puts us in a legal place that's very delicate, especially when we're potentially merging educational and social service or health data. And so the way we were able to bridge those realities is that the entity that's giving the data, like the agency or the private college, is the one that has the opportunity to say, yes, it's okay to use the data in this way. And the concern was, what if some entity keeps saying no all the time? And somebody needs to take a look at that and understand why it is they keep saying no to data requests. So one of the safeguards we thought is that the Data and Tools Advisory Board would be taking a look at all of those requests that go in. And one of the problems we're trying to solve for was if some entity just keeps saying no, that there'd be a public forum to talk about why. But just as importantly in that discussion, we talked about the fact that maybe we won't get it right the first time around. So there might be something about the process that's really cumbersome for people, or there might be some great new idea for ways to use a new technology that might surface from the advisory board. So we worked on some wording that clarified, like, not taking away from the idea that we're at least paying attention to serial denials, but we're also looking more proactively at ways to improve the process. That's the intention of this language, which shows up here and then at one other point further down. So are there any thoughts or concerns about that change?
That reinforcement of continuous.
Okay, and then under the responsibilities of the office, we did put in there more specifically about security. As you may recall from the planning process, this was one of the most intensively discussed issues, particularly with our evolving security landscapes. We just sort of reinforced that point. And then we also, again, looking at the fact that the office seems to have this wonderful possibility for facilitating dialogue amongst the providers, as we're about to see with the discussion of how we together look at the definitions we use for employment and earnings. We just added a little clarifying language that really elevates that role of convening conversations.
Can I ask, go back to my ask the clarifying questions about the research request edits? When it says reviews all data requests, does that mean like current active ones, or are we talking about previous ones that have been accepted or rejected? Post.
We're going to look at all the things that came in the prior year.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean they're going to get access to super granular things, but they'll look more broadly at sort of like what was accepted and what wasn't. And then maybe a little bit more detail for the ones that weren't, like the rationale.
There's a separate document for the steps in the research process.
Yes.
And is this board in that process?
Nope.
Okay, because this makes it look like they're part of the review process. But
So they are looking after the fact.
yeah, so if there was some way we could clarify that reviews all prior or completed.
Maybe all the closed ones or however we want to define it, but we don't want it to appear like they're right in the thick of the review.
Thank you. That we actually had at one point a model where there was going to be a committee that was going to review, and we really worked through the logistics of that and very intentionally walked away from that choice. It's an excellent clarification.
And that was specifically to be able to get access to.
Yeah, I also think it's critical because we want to position this advisory board to provide strategic guidance to the governing board on how the request should be handled, including like what criteria they're using to, like all of those things, all the mechanics of how the request get processed.
And then we also, again, because under the data providers, we have a note in there that they're the ones approving the use of the data that they provide. One of the reasons we really dug a little bit back into the research request process was because we had questions that came up from governing board members at the last meeting for folks who had not been involved in the planning process. So we just really want to be elevating some of that, knowing there will be these other formal, highly specific policies that will be referenced by others. But we just, again, wanted to make sure that information was crystal clear for new board members coming in. Great, so now I'm jumping down to page. And so this has to do with how we're setting board meetings. So what we're clarifying is that we're going to be setting all the meetings at the very beginning of the fiscal year by the staff, and they'll do it with the governing board, it'll be posted, and then we've got the general cadence of meetings that we're expecting, although this could be modified if needed. Then moving down to the next page, you'll note that it also says that we're clarifying that governing board members should be expected to block the full day when those meetings are scheduled, even if the meetings won't take the full day. And this has to do with this interesting dilemma we're going to have, and that the statute states that there must be 2/3 of all people who were appointed to the governing board agreeing to any decision, not based on quorum. And since we're all getting used to coming back to in-person meetings again, we just really wanted to make sure that everyone was crystal clear that by being on the board, you're really going to have to devote those 4 days. And we clarified quorum, and this was, we went back and originally we did benchmarking against that idea of having the minimum threshold needed for the vote, but it was decided that it would be valuable to have people be able to discuss things even if a vote can't be taken, which is why we reduced it to the normal quorum. And that brings us down to the question of having an alternate. This is page 22. So again, this is this issue of how we have to make sure that everybody's here, or as close to everybody is here as possible in order to take a vote. And so in thinking about the idea of creating an alternate, the feeling was that it should not be up to the individual member to decide who their alternate is going to be. So if you can imagine that the Senate is appointing somebody, that it should be the Senate appointee's office that's determining who the alternate should be. And so this wasn't something that we had clarified originally, but we thought this was something that would be more true to the intention of the appointments process. So I just wanted to get it clarified. Are there questions about that? And going down again on page 22, we start to clarify the role of the chairs of the governing board. So earlier in the process, there had been this mention of something like a vice chair who was going to be the incoming chair. And so we thought it was easiest to just use some consistent wording of the current and the incoming chair, and we broke out what their responsibilities would be. So also in having a 2-year term where you've got really clear responsibilities in each year, it might be a little bit more enticing for people to run for board chair. And I'm not hinting, really, even though we do have an election coming up, that we could use people to run for board chair. So we clarify the process by which you indicate that you want to be a board chair, which is basically a statement of interest for discussion and vote. And we also clarify when that's going to happen in the year. So that's going to be the last meeting of the fiscal year, and that you have to have the minimum of 14 to meet the statute, and then we'll use a runoff process for if you have too many excellent candidates, and that the board chair starts on July 1. Any questions or concerns about that process?
Sorry, but I think in the first year of their term, chairs will support the current chair is
Incoming chairs.
The chair of that.
that the chair elect might be more clear. So they're being, they're serving a 2-year term. One of those years is chair elect, and the second year is the presiding chair or the actual chair. Is that
Sitting
the
chair.
intention?
We could use whatever words make this easy to understand. Is presiding. Chair elect singular.
Because there will only be one at any.
Yes, I'm working on pronoun issues for that, but yes, I could totally understand. I'll say that term.
Oh, no, I was just saying the chair elect, just to leave the S. You
Oh,
have
oh, it
already-
is
I'm
elected.
sorry. My eyes didn't notice this straight through. I'm sorry.
We're in a grammar
Yes.
moment where
No,
there
same here, I think
is
it's
making
fine.
its way. to
No,
stuff.
I think there's,
Okay.
I just didn't see the strike through on the S. Apologies.
No problem. Okay, so then I can go through and I will make the fixes throughout so that we refer to the president-elect, Chair-elect, so chair-elect and the presiding chair. I do that throughout, would that solve the issue?
So the very last sentence, it's not redlined, but the representatives of specific institutions. Understand that to be that you don't want to have any given institution, like the current the presiding chair and incoming chair, but it would just suggest a rewriting somehow, because you're not saying. I understand the intent, but I think it could be misinterpreted as to be exclusionary to effect.
But you make it positive, specific institution may only have one spot at a time. That would resolve the consecutive term issue. And I can even make that clearer, so. There may not be from this thing. So we don't make it the IE, we'll just make it, that is the statement, because it's the third one. So then we divide it up to tasks so that and again, we're going to change this to presiding. Board chair facilitates the meeting, sets the agenda, acts as the primary point of contact with the office, supports the staff with communications, does the annual review of the executive director, whereas the chair-elect will be responsible for convening all the various committees, onboarding new governing board members, doing exit interviews with outgoing governing board members, and supports the board liaison with the onboarding the new advisory board members. Friends about that? Let me have a visual. Then we get down to the ad hoc committees. So one of the things that we realized as we were trying to parse how all of this was going to work with Bagley Keene and what is the governing board's responsibility and what is the office's responsibility, we realized that it made more sense to have ad hoc committees specifically refer to committees that the governing board chooses to put together. So for example, the one that's on reviewing the manual like we're doing right now, or the advisory board nomination process, which is under the purview of the governing board, or the executive director review ad hoc committee. And that we would have a separate name that we would use to refer to formal committees that are convened by the office. We're going to call those task forces. And so a good example would be, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be convening a group to look at the best way to construct employment and earnings definitions, because each of the segments does it a little bit differently. So that would be a task force being convened by the managing entity, because the office needs to figure out how to actually construct that. But we want visibility about it. So it will be announced at a governing board meeting so everybody can know about it. And those meetings may be made open to the public over Zoom, but we don't have to have them in person because they're not under the Bagley Keene umbrella in that way, which is not an attempt to get around Bagley Keene. It's actually more the attempt to be able to use things like Zoom to foster greater collaboration, because it's actually harder to get people in person than it is online right now. So that just begins to clarify how this works, and this idea that there's always going to be a charter that makes clear what it's about, and that we always know that these are going to be in person and separate.
What about actual membership?
It says the membership criteria are one of the things that are in the charter. So that's a good question. The way that this has historically been done is that it gets announced at a board meeting and people are asked to volunteer. Does it need to be more clarification about that than they know?
So these are ad hoc committees.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not like we have.
But there might be an example of an ad hoc committee that you all would choose to convene, where you might say, I don't believe that I am the right person for my organization to come, and I'm going to deputize my colleague because they've got more expertise on this topic. So it leaves some flexibility for the governing board members to think about who should serve.
I think we have to note that ad hoc committees can be made as public, as well as board members. Do we need to make that notation? No, we're just sort of getting started, so within this ad hoc committee, it's all board members.
Are we still talking about page 23?
Yes.
Ad hoc committees.
Yeah.
I think you. Go ahead, Charles.
Well, I was just gonna say that the membership criteria, whatever is required.
I think in the past, it was sort of, I think we need to have an ad hoc committee look at this, right? So we're trying to establish a more structured way of doing that and encapsulate it within the governance manual. I think a good idea. So going forward, as we see the charter come up, right, for another ad hoc committee, if it's not detailed enough or inclusive or thorough or what have you, I'm sure that revisions can be suggested.
I concur. I mean, I think in the long run, we're looking at ad hoc committees to be comprised of more than just board members. It could be those who are deputized or those who are members of other organizations or agencies or members of the public. We'll want to clarify that it's ultimately the discretion of the board who gets on the ad hoc. Right? And I guess that's what's distinct from that to the task force to some degree. Apart from it coming, a task force originates from the office. So that ultimately we might maybe it's not with this round of ad hoc committees because we're still just going through this cycle right now of understanding and unpacking it. But ultimately we want to define the distinction between those two. Right now, I think we probably have enough to proceed, but certainly it's one of those things that we want to clarify. If that's our consent.
I think this item would be good to footnote for our May meeting, just to clarify the discussion.
All right, so now I'm hopping all the way down to 25, page 25. And this has to do with communications. So one of the things that we realized is that it'd be really helpful to make clear to governing board members that communications with other parties should be done in close consultation with staff and with the board chair. And so it just makes that really clear, and also shares that the office will provide materials to board members related to communication so that you're not just sort of left there out on your own. So in addition to asking for support and communication, you also receive support from the office.
I would suggest flipping the order of this paragraph so that it starts with the office staff have developed or are developing this kind of concept and so forth. Okay. And then if the topic, the scope are outside or beyond those standard communication points. But if the desire is to ask before engaging at all, I can just ask board members should do that, and it's not as simple as we have to email others.
I know we've gotten Kevin Payne, who couldn't be here, had felt that it was really important that you should just check in, because you never know what might be running under the surface, what looks like an innocent request could actually be something more complicated. What are your thoughts about that still being fairly prescriptive that you would check? I mean, obviously, it's not like your colleague is like, you're on the Cradle-to-Career board, you're like, I can't talk to you, I've got to check in with the board chair, but related to inquiries, does this language feel appropriate and clear?
I mean, for me, I understand the spirit of what we're saying here, and I definitely am in favor of having perspective on this. But when I read this now, it's a little bit difficult to imagine how to operationalize this. And it's also the, like Meredith was saying, these two paragraphs together, it sort of, in my mind, makes the line blurry between when I should defer and when I should. So I think number one, like if there are scenarios where we didn't have to do this, we could rely on the context. We should be clear that there are such scenarios and anything outside the parameters. Then also in the case of consulting with or referring to the board chair, how did that happen? Because practically it might not be that easy to get a hold of the board chair. So is there a specific contact person, or email address, or some sort of way, send out meeting request to meeting at regular meeting or something like that?
I don't have one yet. I know that there's comms position that's planned. I think practically how we're handling that right now, folks are just emailing. And I think that we are having a conversation about that. And I think that we're sort of just doing our best. And I think that the idea is not to sort of put a gag order on anybody, right?
Yeah.
We do in our own worlds have responsibilities that are tangential to or even outside of Cradle-to-Career, which we must be responsive and responsible for. And we intend to do the same when it comes to Cradle-to-Career. So the question is, whether or not being responsive, the timeliness is then weighed against, how much do I know versus how much might I not be aware of?
Yeah.
Right, that the executive director or the chair or other parties might. It's really, I believe this is in good counsel to make that consultation. And we have to remember too that this governance manual is binding, so nobody's gonna it's not a comms release, right? So, and we're all trying to do our best, and we're all trying to speak from a position of information.
I see Kathy just added by email on the phone, so maybe that will help clarify. And here we can make sure that my work cell, for example, number is available to board members. For instances where something sensitive may come up, board always in their books 100% of the time, so we can do that.
I also added the modifier before engaging in formal communications, which begins to help indicate those lines. And also after I flopped the order of starting with the staff is going to develop things to help board members out, including what types of communications are appropriate to engage in. Because certainly one of the value of having the governing body members is that you become sort of evangelists for the system as you're doing things where you can, in your daily work, be referencing what's going to be so helpful about the system related to something that's of value to your constituency.
And then just a small thing on the second, well, I guess will be the first talking points. Those will likely need to evolve. That's be disseminated on Twitter. I don't think we need to specify all those details, but something like curate, something that's like an active.
That sounds great. Once we have
someone on board who can lead these efforts, depending, I know access is a little tricky depending on where people sit, but having a place where people can go to and find the resources in real time, so that, you know, the current version of our FAQ document is always here, and here's the current version of the slides.
Right.
As opposed to trying to get the email from September or whatever. it
Right.
is.
I'm trying to remember, okay, who said what at which one?
So now we're hopping all the way down to page 28, which is just restating what the Data and Tools Advisory Board is doing about prior data requests, which I've just put the word prior in instead of modifier. Then we're going to go down to page 31. And this is, again, consistent with the earlier bullet points, emphasizing the importance of security in what the office is doing related to the tech infrastructure. And then going down to page 32. Yeah, this list came from the roles and responsibilities that were approved by the work group, but Chris had this really great question where we had listed here that the office is supporting the development of technical data security policies, et cetera. And Chris said, well, if they're supporting, who's leading? And then we realized that, well, actually that would be the office that would be leading the work in that way, that it sort of creates the operationalization of the strategic direction of the board. So we thought that was one place where it was good to just clarify that they'd be taking the lead on that. Although there will be a task force that's going to get convened board meeting to begin to look at those issues. So there'll be data providers that will be part of crafting these books. Then going down to page 34, that's where you see the description of the task forces. So this is where we're splitting out what it is that the office is doing that is different than what the governing board is doing. So these mostly are going to be things that have to do with how do you actually implement the vision established by the governing board. Again, these are things that will be publicly announced. They'll have the same type of charter that you see for an ad hoc committee. However, and the desire to have things out in the public with things posted for public review and comment, and whenever we can, having the meetings broadcast on Zoom. But this allows us to not be bound to having it in person. Again, it's convened by the office rather than the governing board. Does that feel clear enough as you're thinking about the distinctions between those two?
I appreciate that. I wonder if we need to mention.
That's a great idea. Then the last thing that we did is we thought that we should remove the actual text of the Bank Key Act. One can hope that it will be amended to make online video conferencing options more possible in the future. It also allowed us to cut the length of the governing board manual in half, which we thought maybe people might be more likely to read it. And that way we can just have a web link to the most current version. That actually was the totality of the changes that were recommended. So sort of stepping back and looking at all that we discussed, does that feel about right? Remembering what we had talked about in our last ad hoc meeting, or things that have been occurring to you that you wish you had known when you got appointed to the board? So I think we're going to check and see if there's anything in Q&A.
Nope, I don't see anything in Q&A or in chat.
All right, well, we finished in record time.
We really have. So thank you all for your work. I know that there were others that were part of the ad hoc committee to bring the discussion forward. And thank you three for being here today, helping us make our forum. If there are no objections, I'd like to adjourn the meeting. All right, well, thank everybody for participating, even those of you that are out there in the public that we can't see here in the room. It's been great getting to move forward on this, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.